All right, our big story here. President Trump intensifying his review of American history museums and instructing his lawyers to re-examine exhibits that he calls, quote, woke. Now, the White House saying that the museum should portray America's brightness and not, as the president said, how bad slavery was. Now, the president writing on his social media platform that this country cannot be woke because woke is broke. We have the hottest country in the world, and we want people to talk about it, including in our museums. ABC News' Christian Cordero is joining me now with more. And so, Christian, part of the reason it sounds like, too, this is getting so much attention is because the president, visited these museums in 2017. He had a really different take, right? In one word, just called it incredible. So what's the difference now?
Well, Kana, he visited the African American Museum here in Washington, D.C., a Smithsonian museum back in 2017. Aside from incredible, he also said in a podium speech afterwards, that this is an important reminder to fight bigotry in all its forms. The secretary of the Smithsonian, interestingly enough, wrote about that visit in his memoir. The president's reaction, according to the secretary, to an exhibit about the role the Dutch played in the slave trade was that, and this is according to the memoir, Trump said, quote, "You know they love me" in the Netherlands. So there is much to be made about how the president has approached the issue of slavery, but there's no question, Kana, the difference between 2017 and today is 2020 happened, right? And what we saw around the murder of George Floyd, the killing of Breonna Taylor, there was this call to action about social injustice, and that's so much of what we're seeing this administration respond to when it comes to the undoing of diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, curriculum changes, things of that nature. But what the president is essentially boiling it down to is that we should be highlighting America's accomplishments and not criticizing its faults.
Well, and you sort of alluded there to the fact that this is a broader concern for the president. We know the president and all is focused on at least 8 museums, right? What more do we know about that overall approach, Christian?
Yeah, we know that the president has ordered his attorneys to review the museums, and it is a kind of a broad stroke, if you will, but there's no doubt that the Smithsonians are the target here. He's called the Smithsonians out specifically in all of it, and the vast majority of the Smithsonians are right here in Washington, D.C. So we'll see what actually comes of this. There are questions about how much authority a president actually has over what can and cannot be shown in museums, but the president's goal here and the administration overall is to get rid of exhibits that they don't agree with.
All right, Christian, our thanks to you for being here with us. I'm going to bring our big story now to our panel. And so joining us today is the former GOP national spokesperson, Elizabeth Pipko, senior culture writer of Anscape, Justin Tinsley, editor of the National Review, and ABC News contributor Ramesh Ponnuru, and Democratic strategist and ABC News contributor Christina Sinsoon Ramirez. Christina, let's start here with you. Why do you think there's been such a public shift in tone from the president towards the museum? I mean, as Christian reminded us here, in 2017, he called one of them a meaningful reminder of why we have to fight back, fight bigotry. And again, that was 2017.
Yeah, this is a president that has always wrestled and struggled with the fact that we live in a diverse country where Black and brown people have equal rights and citizenship. Let's remember that he launched his kind of public foray into race politics with the Central Park five young Black men who were found to be not guilty. And he said that they should be put to death publicly and put out ads for that. But aside from this, right, the fact that it's offensive and inaccurate, to me, a society that can confront and battle with some of its darker legacies and come out and say, we are a stronger nation for that, that's actually the better, beautiful story of our country instead of erasing it. But, it's interesting to me that this president says Democrats and progressives have been totally focused on woke ideology, as he says, instead of actually dealing with the bread and butter issues that Americans care about. Most Americans elected him to deal with the affordability crisis. And instead of doing that, he's spending time and energy trying to rewrite history, erase history, instead of making rent more affordable, housing more affordable, the cost of goods more affordable. I think most Americans of all political persuasions would want this man to get back to work, our president to get back to work on those issues instead of focusing on this.
And while he has been public about it, it sounds like, right, he really did assign Vice President J.D. Vance and Interior Department Secretary Doug Burgum to take this on as part of that executive order. But Elizabeth, what about the president's argument here? Do you think that there's a lack of American pride and positivity in some of these exhibits?
Yeah, look, I'm glad that you framed the question that way because that's how I see what's going on here. I think you can criticize President Trump for a lot of things, especially if you didn't vote for him. You can disagree with all his politics. I do not think it's fair or appropriate to say that this is a man who struggles with the fact that white people and black people have equal rights in America. That is very far from the truth. And the fact is here, look, two things can be very true at once, that America had an extremely dark history, like most other countries, and that we're also the greatest country on the face of the earth. And we could acknowledge both of those things, and both of those things can be true in the same reality. So the fact is, I like that you brought it back to that. I think that's exactly the problem, that we have a lack of patriotism. Patriotism is going down amongst younger people in our country. That's what I think affects Donald Trump. I think he thinks not enough people want young people to know how lucky we are to be in America. It has nothing to do with not teaching our history. And I think you can easily do both without teaching young folks to hate the country that they live in.
And Justin, as you're watching all this unfold and listening, what's your take?
One of my favorite quotes from James Baldwin, he once said, "I love America so much that's why I have the right to criticize her." Look, if you curl your lips, whether you're the president of the United States or whether you're a person in line at the grocery store, to sit here and say, hey, let's not focus on how bad slavery was, like it was a footnote, then that says a lot about you. This was an evil where black men, women, and children were stripped from their homelands for. They were transported across the Atlantic Ocean. If they were lucky, they jumped overboard into shark-infested waters. Women were raped in front of their husband and children. Families were separated. Teeth were literally pulled out of their mouth and given to U.S. presidents. You can rename all the military bases to their original Confederate names that you want. You can try to rewrite curriculums in school, but here's what you can't erase. And I agree with Donald Trump. Maybe slavery wasn't that bad. It's the most evil, god-awful thing this country has ever done, and we're still suffering the effects of it to this day.
And Ramesh, what's your take here?
Well, I agree with some of what everybody here has said. I think if you look at what Trump said in his post and you take it literally and maybe a little bit charitably, what he said is, his complaint is, everything is about how bad slavery was, nothing about the greatness of America. Now, I think you can do both. I think you can talk about the positive and the negative aspects of American history, which are in a lot of ways intertwined. Now, that doesn't mean, I think, downplaying the evil of slavery. Of course, it also has to involve talking about how we fought it, how we overcame it, along with what we still have to do.
And Justin, to go back to you on it, what is your assessment of the president's sort of change and shift in rhetoric from when he went and viewed these museums in 2017 to now?
We spoke about it a little bit earlier. 2020 is what changed. 2020 changed the arc of this country's history. And we were focusing so much on social justice, racial justice, and that he ran on basically the opposite side of the platform in this. And again, look, this country does have its beautiful parts, but this country has its ugly parts. The only accurate way to tell the story is to tell the entire story. You can't tell the story of America without talking about its injustices. You can't tell the story of America without talking about its triumphs. So trying to belittle one to hype up another, that's never going to sit well with the communities and the people that had to suffer from these atrocities.
And Elizabeth, a little bit to Christina's point that she brought up earlier here, that perhaps the president is focusing on some of the wrong things instead of focusing on these kitchen table issues. Part of the reason that he got elected, he's in the news for something like this. Do you think that this is a distraction?
No, I don't. I think if anyone has followed President Trump since nearly 2015, he talks about anything and everything. He always has. And I think as someone who was one of the younger folks on our campaign, I can tell you a lot of people were really uncomfortable by the fact that folks in my age group and younger are genuinely unhappy to be American, right? The numbers are going down. If you look at how patriotic every generation has been for many years now, the numbers are going down. It's something I've talked to President Trump about. I think he's very uncomfortable with how many young people nowadays are taught to hate our country. And I think for him, this is a major issue.
All right, Elizabeth, Justin, Ramesh, and Christina, a lot more to talk about here on ABC News Live.